Good morning all, this is Steve Nolan from the Structures Design Office. Thank you for your structures engineers for hanging in there through the roadway portion, and any of you that just joined us, welcome. Just a brief roadmap here. We've grouped the changes into general revisions, minor, and some more significant ones that you need to pay attention to. We'll backtrack to the drainage standards briefly and then look at the developmental standards and what's coming. So just to reiterate what Alan spoke about earlier, as far as the organisation of the design standards, indexes primarily, we're talking to the contractor. The IDSs are really for the designer, the EOR or the contractor's EOR. And then we often have data tables which convey project-specific intent to the contractor of the design standards. Think of that as the Rosetta Stone, so that we're all talking the same language during the project. The data tables are delivered in the DOT CAD load. We also have them available on the design standards support webpage under the structures website. So moving to the standards that were deleted this year, Index 501, last year they removed the material requirements for the geosynthetic materials to, that was actually moved to the APL and specification 985. And then Index 2, 20,005 is the temporary bracing for pre-stressed beams. There will be a temporary design bulletin coming out probably early next week, maybe Friday, but more likely early next week, describing the new process for designing that. It's essentially the same as what we've been doing with the design standards. There'll be some instructions in Chapter 11 of the Structures Design Guidelines for the contractor's engineer of record, and there will be, the data table will be slightly reconfigured to reflect some more recent changes that have come out through research that we've funded. So look forward to that in about a week's time. The general revisions apply to multiple indexes simultaneously. We're just catching up on some specification changes from previous years. The galvanizing repair is actually under Section 562 in the specification. Previously it was 975. This is primarily affecting our bridge fencing standards. Chester alluded to reorganization of the notes on the design standards for the sign, signal, and lighting standards. So they should be a little more consistent across different indexes. Some of the design information, specifically the soil information, was removed from the lighting specification, the lighting standard to the instruction for the design standards. We also went through and removed all the addition numbers for the design specifications. Every time AASHTO releases a new update, we don't want to go in and update the header information for the design criteria. So we made a commitment to keep up to date with the code, the AASHTO bridge specification code that's adopted through the structures manual. So if for whatever reason something can't be implemented immediately on the design standard, that would be noted under the design criteria. So that should just make maintenance moving forward a lot easier. We also have, I guess, relaxed the criteria for referencing standards in the plans. Some were interpreting that we had to list the index number and the index name when we're calling out something in the roadway or structures plans, but the intention really is either or. That information is enough for the contractor to follow up with the designer's intent. Some minor revisions for the bullet railing, which is the pedestrian railing attachments on traffic railings under index 423, and then the pedestrian railing 821. We allowed a little more splice length, a little more tolerance on where the splice can be for the fabricators and the installers. That shouldn't affect designers. It went from 21 inches to 24 inches maximum offset from the center line of the post. The thriving retrofit instructions, we added some language in there for designers to consider scuppers where they might conflict with anchor bolts, so something you need to be aware of. The gravity wall index, we removed some of the design criteria that's circled there above the wall and below the wall. This is really information that the contractor doesn't need unless he's redesigning the project, so that's something the designer considers in laying out the project. So that information will actually be already on the cross sections. Then the access hatch assembly is really the access doors on the underside of concrete and steel boxes. The payment was changed to be included in the cost of the box, whether that's the reinforced concrete or structural steel. Some of the cell revisions. That blue box used to say update your cells, but somehow that disappeared. Anyway, the cells are really the data tables that are delivered with the catalog. Just some general cleanup. One of the pervasive changes was the change in height of the special height bicycle railing from 54 inches to 48. So that had a domino effect on multiple indexes and cells. And then the load rating tables, we tweaked some details on there. Those are, like I said, available in the catalog. I think maintenance release 2 came out recently for SS3. SS4 will be coming out shortly if it hasn't already. So those updated tables are included in those catalogs. But if you're still operating under the maintenance release 1, you can actually download the cell library separately if you need to, or if you're working in another state, not with the DOT catalog, those are also available at the URL listed there below the cutout. Some of the other data tables with changes were 11 cantilever sign structure and the mast arm, special mast arm assemblies. There were 2 parameters that were missing from the tables that were required for the contractor to install those structures. So those are now included. Oh, there it is. We had some animation. Okay, moving on to the significant changes. The change in the special height bicycle railing from 54 inches to 48 was adopted in the PPM in January this year under Chapter 8.8. So that resulted in some changes to all the pedestrian railings that covered those heights, with some minor changes to panel dimensions and so forth. The bullet railings were a little more involved because we used to have a single, double, and a triple rail that went on top of either the traffic railing or the concrete parapet. So we've actually eliminated the triple rail. So you'll see we eliminated the post A, which was the triple bullet rail configuration, and we've added a post D, which will address the 48-inch height on top of the 27-inch concrete parapet. And then we used to have a post B1 and B2 to address heights on other concrete foundations, and we were able to consolidate those 2 into a single post B, which will address 2 separate configurations depending on whether it's a concrete parapet or a 32-inch traffic railing. We also changed the title on Index 820 just to be consistent with some of the other indexes, which should make everything a little more clear. Okay, moving on to some other changes on the pedestrian railings. The plate washer was just moved to the correct location underneath the slotted, above the slotted hole, well, underneath the slotted hole. This is a delayed correction for when we changed the configuration last year. For the Specialized bicycle railing, as previously mentioned, that is now 48 inches. So corresponding changes were made on 852. But we've also added a 4-bolt anchorage configuration, as you can see on the lower right-hand side, and we've moved the mounting location on stairways from the top of the cheek wall to the top of the step, which will allow us, which provides better anchorage and possibly allow us to reduce their anchorage depth in the future when we move to the new adhesive anchor design criteria, which should be coming out later this year. On Index 862, as well as those two previous changes, we also added a special extrusion post, which we're designating Type C. This is really an option for the fabricator. It eliminates the need for welding to the base plate. There's also an option to provide an additional top plate, which eliminates the need for welding to the upper rail. This extrusion currently isn't in production. I imagine that we would need a pretty large job for that to warrant somebody paying for the upfront cost of the extrusion die. But this is a standard connection detail that's in the aluminum design manual, and moving forward, it should make fabrication assembly much faster. The noise wall index, as we just clean up some notes, we reduced some of the pile lengths in the tables. If you bother to go through and compare those from 2015, just a minor thing on the 17-foot height, we apparently skipped over that one. It was above or below 17 feet, so I think we could have all interpreted which bearing pad we would need to install under the previous index. But we're clarifying that will be the 4x5, the larger bearing pad. We also corrected the instructions under Index 5200. It had the soil type swapped. Didn't actually match the data table and the index, so that should all match up now. Moving on to the junction slabs for the traffic railings on MSE walls and underneath noise walls. We've added an option in there similar to what is in the gravity wall index to allow stay-in-place polymer bond breaker. This should help with, especially with slip forming, allowing that form to stay in place and help restrain the dowel bars that are required at expansion joints. Index 8, 61 and 6110 and 6120. We also added an optional shear key that can be used by the contractor that has the effect of stiffening up the form, which helps with the slip form passing over that joint. There's also a requirement if the option for using GFRP dowels is required. The GFRP has a lower shear capacity than the steel dowel, so the supplemental keyed concrete joint is required there to provide equivalent capacity. So once again, those are options for the contractor. On the permanent MSE wall general index sheet, we've removed the toe wall dimension that used to previously 4 feet. And then there's a 10-foot requirement in the PPM now. So that dimension is actually going to be whatever is in the final plans for the contractor. He's not going to refer back to the index to build the berm. So that was really design criteria that didn't need to be on the index itself. So that's where that dimension went to. The cross section in the plan should actually give you that information. The sidewalk 6120 is the coping for the raised sidewalk traffic railing. There was a restriction for slip forming on that. We removed the slip forming restriction on index 6110, which is the F-shaped buried junction slab a year or two ago. So we're just making that consistent. The junction slab at drainage inlet openings, the recess dimensions were not consistent with the other indexes, so those have been updated. So now everything should match across all the MSE wall junction slab indexes. So moving on to pre-stressed beams, the build-up and deflection data table, we've added in horizontal curves as being included under case 2 for the build-up deflection tables. Those that do curve bridges would know this, but perhaps it's an oversight for newer engineers and those that are primarily doing Category 1 straight bridges. But as due to the curved alignment and the chorded alignment of the pre-stressed beams, there is the effect of essentially a sag at mid-span for the build-up above the top of the pre-stressed beams. So that needs to be considered when calculating the values for the tables and the weights of additional concrete on top of the pre-stressed beams for design. So that applies to both I-beams and U-beams. Some changes to the elastomeric bearing pad standard was really just clarification on our intent for the skew angle. We have several configurations of beam ends and pad skews, so hopefully this will clarify that for designers. And the instructions, we also added some similar language in there to help with that for the designers. So pre-stressed beams, under the instructions, the dimension P, which is really the measurement of the horizontal offset of the top of the beam from the bottom of the beam when you have a beam on grade. We require the designer to bevel the forms at the end of the pre-stressed beam in the bed. We've seen some designs where, for very small increments of dimension P, precasters were having to comply with a dimension much less than 1 inch. So we've added guidance in there that when that dimension P is less than 1 inch, then you can just make the end of the beam square, and you don't have to adjust the slope on the end of the pre-stressed beam. For the instructions on the Florida U-beams, and this is also applicable to the I-beams, we added additional clarification. It's actually the second sentence in that clip there, that to consider the vertical curve geometry along the effective alignment of the chord at the center line of the beam, since it's actually going to have different elevations than if you followed the curve alignment. So that's just building on the previous slide. The pre-stressed concrete piles, we removed the vent hole at the bottom of the concrete piles for the 30-inch voided piles several years ago. We did have a vent in the upper portion of the void that was required to be then vented out to pile cap footing, if there was one. That is no longer necessary in our opinion. So we have removed that requirement for the contractor to cast that into the pre-stressed pile. We also had to rearrange the notes to correspond to that change. The light pole pedestal, we removed some design information to the instructions for design standards. And then we had some commentary about which traffic railings this information might be applicable to. The corral shape, which is really the post and beam, doesn't really accommodate lighting conduit very well. It's a very congested railing, and this is also shown under the conduit detail 21-210, with the problem primarily being getting the junction box in the back of the traffic railing without compromising the strength. So we don't recommend using the corral rail or using utility junction boxes embedded into the corral rail, and that's reflected in the notes on the instructions. For our acro bridge, a temporary detour bridge, we're actually going to a triple truss now as our standard recommended configuration. This will allow us to avoid having to post for permit vehicles. The department owns all that, the 300 series acro bridge, so we have the material available, and there was a little, I guess, mistrust on our maintenance department for permit truckers to comply with some signing. So what we have done now is change the design criteria to be full HS, to be HS25, or which is going to easily accommodate the FL120. So this triple truss, which now just adds a additional truss between the two outer ones, requires a slightly different bearing configuration. This isn't going to really affect designers, but contractors will just, and inspectors will have to be aware of that change. The driving guardrail approach attachment that connects with the temporary detour bridge was also updated to include the change in connection heights. Well, actually, to include the change in the tri-beam transition panel that now has downstream guardrail at 31-inch height on the previous 27. On the post-tensioning detail indexes, just a change in terminology for consistency with other documents. And there was some additional plan content guidance added into the instructions for design standards. So encourage you to go and look at that if you're involved in those types of designs, post-tension designs. So now backtracking to the drainage standards under the Index 200 series. There were some recent changes in the AASHTO design specification that limited the minimum size of deformed water wire. Previously it was we had on Index 201 3.1. I mean, a D 3.1 was the minimum size. AASHTO or ASTM has determined that smaller wire size is not really appropriate. Note that that's really only the deformed wire size. The smooth wire can still be smaller than D 4.0. So it's AASHTO that's imposing the minimum design requirement for a minimum wire size for deformed bar. I believe under the ASTM you can still manufacture smaller wire, but it's not going to be allowed for design. And Index 292, which is the precast box culvert standards, that had the same note in there, so correspondingly made. And we also corrected a bust in the cover note for moderately aggressive environments. So that's now consistent with the structures design guidelines and the other indexes. For flared end sections, which are a challenge to reinforce conventionally, some manufacturers are exploring the option to use fiber reinforcing in lieu of conventional steel reinforcing or welded wire mat, which has been allowed now for a couple of years by the structures design guidelines. Requires a separate design submittal to be submitted to the state drainage engineer and approved through the traditional shop drawing process. So you might see some of those coming out on construction projects in the near future. Supplemental details for precast concrete box culverts is added an option for placement of the top slab. The bottom detail with the blue circle there really is an emulation of the four-sided, the monolithic box culvert, to ensure that the top slab is restrained if there's some settlement. We have allowed on other projects the option of spanning across the joint with the separate top slab unit to mitigate some potential settlement that may cause. This has the advantage of allowing the contractor to more easily install the top slab from downstream to upstream, which is the typical way for us installing the bottom unit. So hopefully this should give the contractor some relief, especially if stage construction is necessary, or phased construction. So moving on to developmental indexes, we have added a requirement in there that these actually haven't been published. They'll be published in the next week or so. That the developmental design standard needs to be included in the plan set. Apparently that wasn't clear. And then we've also, hang on, let me back up a little. Yeah, that's all I had to say on that one. Now, a couple of recently published design standards were the FRP bar bending, and then prestressed concrete sheet piles, and square concrete bridge piles, and fender piles that utilize carbon fiber reinforced polymer strands and glass fiber reinforcing stirrups for the sheet piles. These are actually part of the initiative for innovative materials, and we'll actually be building on this even further in the coming year. If you're lucky enough to attend the design conference, there is a pilot project or a demonstration project that's under design in District 7, scheduled to be let next year, I believe, that's going to be utilizing all of those components that are in the design standard, developmental design standards on the website that's currently out there. The bar bending details require a little bit of a little different configuration than traditional reinforcing, steel reinforcing, because of the limitations on the number of bends that the manufacturers can provide in any single bar. So there's a lot more lapping of these U-shaped and other bend-shaped bars. So that's just something to be aware of when you're detailing your bar bending requirements, which typically, most commonly, are going to be where your sheet pile cap, and maybe in the future for other deck reinforcing. On that pilot project, we actually have GFRP reinforcing in the deck. We have the concrete sheet piles with carbon strands and glass fiber reinforcing stirrups, and then in the bridge piles we have carbon fiber strands and carbon fiber stirrups. So look forward to that in the near future. Looking ahead, we have several development design standards in the pipeline. I believe I talked about the gravity block wall last year, and we really have that completed. We're just waiting on releasing a batch of them at the same time. If you have a need, we can certainly release that earlier. But within the next month, we should be having the three-sided concrete culvert details out, the concrete gravity block wall, and then the new Florida slab beam that's going to replace the pre-stressed slab unit standard. There was a project completed last summer with the Florida slab beams, and there is currently an off-system bridge package that's being developed for county and city projects that will provide some standard superstructure designs for the 4 span lengths and 4 bridge widths that are listed there at the bottom of the screen. We also have a precast intermediate bent cap standard that's under development. That was discussed at the Design Expo also. So go to the website and review that presentation. I'm not making any commitments on when that will be out there. It'll be before the end of the year. So the developmental design standard for the gravity block walls essentially will look something similar to the pictures there. It's really intended just as an option to the cast-in-place gravity wall, and it's very similar to the GRS IDDS developmental standard index 6025 that's used for bridge abutments, but it's just a lighter design and some additional options that you can see there for the option 2 using permeable concrete backfill. All right, we're almost there. Looking ahead, we have some research efforts underway for fiber reinforcing, building on what we've got now currently for drainage structures. There's also concrete pipe that's utilizing steel fiber reinforcing. It's currently an ASTM out there. Department's going to limit that to slightly aggressive environments for now, but we have research underway to quantify the design life for extremely aggressive environments. So hopefully in the next 2 years we'll be able to either expand or confirm that policy on the extremely aggressive environments. There's also ASTM balloting proposed for synthetic fibers, which avoid some of the durability concerns and that some may have with steel fibers in those wet, dry environments. So good things coming down the pipeline. So just a message from our group. Feel free to contact us anytime if you've got any suggestions for improvements or clarifications on what we've got. We have a new team member that started yesterday, so welcome. Rukoshi, and look forward to working with her. And that's all I got. Are there any questions? I can't see your hand, but type them in. Well, there's none right now, but I guess we can respond to any that come in after the presentation. So thank you all.